Hello, IGNOU aspirants. Welcome. If you're tackling Unit 2 in your course, you know that market failure and government failure are absolutely critical topics for your exams. So in this explainer, we're going to break it all down for you, giving you the key concepts and arguments you really need to know to feel confident. So let's kick things off with a question that gets right to the heart of what we're talking about. Think about it. Think about the smog that chokes Delhi every year, or the massive projects trying to clean the Ganga River. If we're always told that free markets are so efficient, why can't they solve these problems by themselves? Why does the government have to step in? Well, it's a great question, and economic theory has a really fascinating answer. All right, here's our game plan. We're going to structure this just like your syllabus to make it super easy to follow. First, we'll talk about the ideal world of perfect market efficiency. Then, we'll dive into the 4 big reasons markets fail in the real world. After that, we'll look at the supposed solution, the government, and see how it can sometimes fail too. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the key takeaways you'll need for your exam. Ready? Let's dive in. Okay, first things first. Before we can talk about failure, we need to understand what success looks like. So let's look at the ideal scenario that economists dream of, the perfectly efficient market. This is basically the gold standard we measure everything against.
Now, here's a key term you absolutely have to know: welfare. In economics, this isn't just about feeling good. It's a specific concept. It means the total benefit that society gets from a product or service. You calculate it by adding 2 things together: consumer surplus, which is the extra benefit you get as a buyer, and producer surplus, which is the extra benefit the seller gets. When that total welfare is as big as it can possibly be, that's what we call efficiency. And this chart right here shows that ideal scenario perfectly. The demand curve on the left shows what people are willing to pay. The supply curve on the right shows what it actually costs to produce the thing. Now, in a perfectly competitive market, they meet right in the middle. That point is the sweet spot. It's where society's welfare is maximized. If you produce too little or too much, you get what economists call a deadweight loss, which is just a fancy way of saying value is being wasted for everyone. But here's the catch. That perfect world is built on some really strict assumptions that often don't hold up in the real world. And when those assumptions break, the market fails. It fails to deliver that maximum welfare we were just talking about. Okay, for your exam, I want you to burn this one simple acronym into your brain: EIPA. EIPA. These are the 4 horsemen of market failure, the classic causes you need to know. That's E for externality, I for imperfect competition, P for public goods, and A for asymmetric information. Let's break them down one by one. First up, E is for externality. An externality is basically a side effect. It's when a deal between 2 people affects a third person who wasn't involved at all. The classic Indian example: crop burning. A farmer sells his product, that's the deal, but the smoke from burning the stubble pollutes the air for millions of people in Delhi. They weren't part of the deal, but they're paying a price. That is a classic negative production externality. And this chart shows us exactly why that's a market failure. See, the bar on the left is the private cost. That's what it costs the farmer. But the bar on the right, the social cost, is way higher. Why? Because it includes all those hidden costs from the pollution, like healthcare bills for people in Delhi. The free market only looks at the private cost, which leads to way too much pollution. The solution? Well, a government might step in with something called a Pigouvian tax to make the polluter pay for that external damage, pushing the private cost closer to the true social cost. Next in our EIPA acronym is I for imperfect competition. This is what happens when you don't have a bunch of sellers competing hard against each other. The most extreme example is a monopoly, just one seller. With no competition, they can produce less of a product and jack up the price. They get rich, but society as a whole loses out. That's another cause of that welfare loss we talked about. All right, now P is for public goods. Think about things like our national defense system, or street lights, or even clean air. These things have 2 special features. First, they're non-rival. Me breathing clean air doesn't stop you from breathing it. And second, they're non-excludable. You can't really stop someone from being protected by the military. Because of this, the private market won't provide them. Why? It's called the free rider problem. Why would you pay for streetlights if you can just enjoy the ones your neighbor pays for? And finally, A stands for asymmetric information. This is a big one. It's when one side of a deal, usually the seller, knows something really important that the other side doesn't. A tragic, real-world example of this was the Boeing 737 MAX crisis. The
The company allegedly knew about serious design flaws but didn't tell the airlines or the pilots everything. That hidden information, that asymmetry, led to a catastrophic market failure with devastating consequences. So, okay, we've got externalities, monopolies, no public goods, and hidden information. The market is failing all over the place. So the obvious solution is for the government to step in and fix things, right? The government can tax the polluters, break up the monopolies, and provide the public goods. But as your syllabus rightly points out, it's not quite that simple, because sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease.
And this brings us to the other side of the coin, what we call government failure. This is when government action, instead of fixing the problem, actually makes things less efficient and creates a whole new set of issues. So here's the crucial insight. We can't think of the government as some kind of perfect, all-knowing entity that just wants to do good. No, it's made of people. It's made of politicians and bureaucrats, and just like everyone else, they act in their own self-interest. A politician's number one goal? Probably to get reelected. A bureaucrat's goal? Maybe to get a bigger budget for their department. And those goals don't always line up with what's best for society as a whole. This basic idea of self-interest creates some very predictable problems, especially within the machinery of a democracy and its bureaucracy. Just take a look at this number from your course material. An estimated 60,000 crore rupees. That's how much was spent in India's 2019 general elections. It's a staggering amount of money. And where does it come from? A lot of it comes from wealthy donors and special interest groups. This can lead to what's called crony capitalism, where policies end up benefiting the political funders, not the general public. This quote from Anthony Downs just hits the nail on the head. Parties formulate policies in order to win elections rather than win elections to formulate policies. Think about what that means. The goal can shift from having good ideas and winning an election to implement them to just coming up with any popular policy that will help you win the election, even if it's inefficient. For instance, politicians might chase the median voter, the person right in the middle, by promising popular but wasteful things just because it's a safe bet to win.
And hey, it's not just the elected politicians. The permanent bureaucracy can be a source of failure too. You need to know these two key terms: regulatory capture and rent-seeking. Regulatory capture is when the watchdog becomes the lapdog. The regulators get too cozy with the very industry they're supposed to be policing. And rent-seeking is when companies realize it's easier to make money by lobbying the government for special favors than by actually creating better products. The whole license and permit Raj era in India was a textbook example of rent-seeking run wild.
Okay, wow, we have covered a ton of ground. So let's boil it all down. What do you absolutely positively need to remember when you walk into that exam hall? Let's summarize the crucial points to help you build the perfect answer.
All right, screenshot this if you need to. These are your key concepts. First, know the definition of welfare. For market failure, you have to remember our mnemonic EIPA and be able to explain each part. And know those key terms like Pigouvian tax and free rider. Then for government failure, the core idea is self-interest, and you must be able to define terms like regulatory capture and rent-seeking. And here is exactly how you can structure a fantastic answer. Start by explaining that markets are not perfect. They fail because of EIPA. Point 2, the standard solution is government intervention. But then, and this is crucial for a top grade, you introduce the counter-argument. The governments themselves can fail because of self-interest. And finally, you link that failure to real-world outcomes like crony capitalism. This shows the examiner you have a complete, nuanced understanding. And that leaves us with this final thought, which is really the central challenge of all public policy. It's not a simple choice of team market versus team government. The reality is both can fail. The real difficult work, especially for a vast and complex country like India, is figuring out the intelligent, delicate balance between the two, finding that sweet spot between free markets and effective, accountable government. Good luck with your studies.